Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Nope Coach podcast. Back assumes you've listened before, so that's very presumptive of me. If this is your first episode, I'm Suzanne Kohlberg, the Nope Coach, and today I'm joined by Emily Aborn, and we are talking about fostering successful collaborations. Something I do on my show is always try and define stuff, because I find you listen to a show and you think you know what the person's talking about, and you get to the end, or sometimes partway through, and you have a totally different idea. When I initially think about collaborations, we're talking about collaborations in business. I used to always just think of paid things. Say Emily and I decide to make a course together, and I don't know what it's about. We make a course about underwater basket weaving, and we enroll 1,000 people at $100 each. I should have done more maths because I'm tired now. But and we go halves in it. That's what I think about. I used to think about collaborations, but over time, and I'm interested to hear your take on this, collaborations is so, like, we're doing collaboration right now, as in a podcast episode together, because we're going to have this conversation and then both of us will share it. And to me, and now the first thing I talked about is more of a joint venture rather than just a collaboration, because I think sometimes when people send me a message and they're like, oh, let's do a collaboration, I used to always be like, oh gosh, no. But now it's just kind of, because I haven't had the best experience in the past of joint ventures. And that's what I was telling Emily when we were chatting via message before we started this show, is sometimes I feel like, you're at school and you're doing a group project and it's agreed person one will do this and person two will do that and person three will do this. Person two and three just kind of are left by the wayside. I'm person one, do all the stuff, but then everyone else gets the same credit. So anyway, all that to say, it's my ramblings about collaborations. Welcome, Emily. Where do you want to start?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think we should start with the school project because that's how I used to feel in school too. And so I didn't like collaborating. Like I just wanted to I would rather do it on my own, right? Then I can do the work myself, know that the work is being done and get the A just for myself. So I'm with you. And I've also been through like a lot of business collaborations that didn't go well. But I like your point about it's not just joint ventures and that I think this was a great example. Like this is a collaboration. So I like to think of a collaboration as like 1 + 1 equals far more than one. So like we're coming together, we're creating something that doesn't exist anywhere else. And it might have been done before like this, but like this conversation has never happened. Like we're creating something entirely new. And the benefit of it, obviously, is that, like, your people get to experience something new. My people, I get to share with them something new. And we are coming together and creating, like, who knows what out of this conversation. So I'll pause there. But I love everything you said so far. And I'm like nodding my head vigorously over here.
I think that's such a great point. Firstly, as an aside, I love interviewing other podcast hosts because it's one point, pause, let the other person come in. Sometimes people are going and going and going and going. And by the time they finally pause, I lost track of which thing I wanted to comment on. So that was just a compliment. But the thing about what we're creating hasn't been created before. This conversation hasn't been had before. I think what people lose sight of in terms of collaboration is in whether it be a podcast or meeting at a networking event or just having a Zoom catch up or in person. I'm an introvert, it makes me want to die inside. Like I have to put on pants. But do you know what I mean? Like meeting with another person or several people, the ripple out effect from that conversation can never be known. So sometimes I had a lady on my show a couple of weeks ago named Wendy Leggett. We talked about retirement. It was fabulous. And then a couple of days later, or a week later, I interviewed this lady, Andy Lyons, who also works with Don't Be Caged by Your Age, which is fabulous. Have you talked to her?
She lives like so close to me.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh! So, but what was funny is, Andy was like, "I love you so much, but you can't come on my show, Suzanne, because you're not old enough." And I was like, "Oh my god, I'm honored!" Like, I'm not at the age I hear that very often. But I said, "Oh, have you met Wendy? Like, I don't know how old Wendy is, but she works for retirement." And I said, anyway, they connected. And I think sometimes it's like you meet someone
Yes.
who meets someone else who knows someone else who knows someone else, and that kind of like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever they call it, separation is such shortcutted. And then a conversation you have offhand with somebody 6 months later, 12 months later, sometimes years later. So earlier this year, I got a message from somebody who said, "Thank you so much for introducing me to this coach. Like we just started working together." I hadn't spoken to that person since I lived in Singleton, which is the Hunter Valley, the wine place of Australia. I've lived in Sydney for we just got into our 6th year, and we went to Tasmania in between there. So it's like, that's a conversation I had over 6 years ago, and that I made an introduction or a suggestion that then that person followed through on. So I think sometimes, like, one of my pet peeves about when we're talking about, or we're going to touch on networking, is when I talk to someone and they go, "Oh, I didn't get a client." I was like, "What do you mean you get a client? You don't go
Yeah.
to networking to client, it's sell through, not to."
Let's not even just leave it at networking, right? Like it's when people post to social media and they didn't get a client, or they send out an email and didn't get a client. Like I had a business before this one, and so I've been an entrepreneur for a decade, but like my business totally changed. Like I used to sell mattresses, and now I write copy. Like it's
Oh, I
very
need to know more
different.
about this later, but keep going. Yes.
Very different. Well, the mattress shop is actually where I learned a ton about collaborations to start. So we can get into that. But somebody on my list that was from the mattress store, like she was on my email list. She's been with me for this entire ride. And like we just worked together this year. So I always say, like, I actually was talking to a woman today and she was so frustrated. She's like, I made all the changes you suggested and like nothing's happened. It's been 2 months. I'm like, it is such, I hate to break it to you, but it is such a long game. But that should also come as an encouragement. Like, just show up, do something every single day, do it consistently, right? And then, like, you start to see the results and they compound. Like, to your point, now the things that you did 6 years ago, they are coming back with like compounding interest. So, when we put a date on our calendar to have a podcast interview or to go to a networking event or whatever the conversation is, don't take it lightly. It's not just like show up and do your thing, like it is truly a moment that you have no idea what's going to happen next. And I think that's a very exciting thing.
I love that. And to your point too, I think, I don't know, this is, in my opinion, allegedly, Danielle Ryan always says that. So if you're listening, I just stole it from you. But it's funny, when you listen to somebody a lot, you tend to take their mannerisms. But she says, in my opinion, allegedly, and I love that. But in my opinion, allegedly, people overlook the podcast that they see. Like, I get to chat to someone. So say I'm a guest. I started my podcasting journey, I guessed, on over 100 episodes before I did my own show. And sometimes people gather podcasts like they gather Pokemon cards. You got to catch them all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like they come on, they don't know anything about my show or who I am. Like now on the other side of it, like even when I was guesting, I'd always listen to one. This is my personal thing. I listen to at least one episode,
Same.
preferably 3, but at least one. So I got an idea of the host and the flow. It always fascinated me. Some people have rapid fire questions around, or they have the secret thing, and they're like, "How do you have an answer straight away?" I'm like, "I know what you're going to ask. I've listened to your show," and they're like, "What? Really?" It's like, to me, it's only kind. But anyway, they do the episode and then they ghost the host. Like, how many people I send them when you're on my show now, and if you've been on my show before and you want to come back on, send me a message. Like, I've only started doing the reels part recently, but I would send them an email with cover. Now they get a folder of reels. You don't have to use them all, but like, look through them, find what you like. Reels here, YouTube link, Spotify link, all this sort of stuff. I kid you not, 90% of people don't even respond to that. They don't say thanks. I'm not saying, that sounds like, oh, she's only doing it to be thanked or whatever. But I'm like, you have a missed opportunity here. Because back to your point about collaborations, I'm interested to hear more about your copy business and stuff too. Because if I come across someone who needs copy, and hello, everybody in business needs copy. If I know you and we've established some sort of rapport and relationship beyond the Pokemon card thing, then I have somebody I'm going to recommend. And sometimes, like, I did BNI. Are you familiar with Business Networking International?
Oh, yes. Yes. You are speaking my former language.
Yeah, I did that for a while. I'm sure there are people who have great success with it, and it's also very dependent on what your business is. The reason I didn't like it personally, as I said, in my opinion, allegedly, is you have a chapter. So this is the one that you go to, and then there is only one from each business. So there's one accountant and one business coach, one realtor, and one mechanic or whatever. Then when the person leaves, so we had an accountant who I loved. It was amazing. So then when he left, I wasn't supposed to, by their rules, refer him anymore. I had to refer the new accountant. What if I don't like that person, or I don't gel with them, or I don't understand them, or whatever? So like, you're not the only copywriter I know, Emily, and I'm sure I'm not the only like mindset coach. I might be the only nope coach because that'd be weird. But do you know what I mean? Like, you're not the only one, which is a good thing, but it will very much depend on my client. Like, I love Ted Lasso like anything else. And I know a money mindset coach who loves Ted Lasso like anything else because they introduced me to it. So if anyone comes to me who is talking about Ted Lasso and they also want money mindset, it doesn't matter about all the other people I know. That's the one for you. So I think, sometimes it's a missed opportunity where you just like, I got on their show and off they went. I've had hundreds of guests now, and there'd be probably over 50% of them, unless I listened back to the episode, I couldn't tell you what we talked about. That's horrible, but true.
You have a great point with like not just collaborating with anybody. And I think that's what I had to go through. And maybe you had too. The painful way was I had to really learn. I mean, some of it came down to like trusting my own self and like learning what my work style and what I was like really having confidence in what I was bringing to the table, because that's a piece of it too. Like if you go in, you think the other person is the one doing you this huge favor, you don't actually go into it with like that fantastic of energy. Like you have to realize we're both coming into this with serious strength and skills and excitement. Like, so I put kind of like little boundaries in place for my like checkpoints. So my first one is like trust. I have to trust that if I don't know the person and I don't like have that trust built with them, I have to at least trust that they're going to deliver on what they promise. So like I won't refer, I take my referrals very seriously now. Like I used to be a part of BNI and I would refer you to anybody just to get that little like brownie point on my scorecard. And now I have realized the hard way that like my referral is my word. Like I am putting my word. It doesn't have to necessarily work out, right? Like it's okay if they decide they're not a good fit, but I need to know that the person I'm referring them to is at least going to deliver on what they promise. So like trust is a big one for me. And then this one I just learned like the past 2 years, but it's respect. And it's like that I respect the person that I'm collaborating with, and also they respect me. And I'll say this, it's very nuanced and you don't know it until you feel disrespected. And then you're like, oh, this is what that is. And then the other one is just like, I think like a mutual delight and excitement to like be doing the collaboration. Like I was also a podcast host who had guests, and like nothing was more icky for me than when somebody would come on my show and I could tell that they were just doing it because they said yes to me, or because like they wanted to check their box on like their podcast Pokemon card. You know what I mean? So I would say those are my three: respect, trust, delight. And like those are my filters now for what I say yes to and what I don't for collaboration. And then there's other things, like obviously you have to have the capacity for it, right? Like you could be collaborating all day and it's a lot of work. It can be more work than doing things on your own. So you have to factor that in too.
Actually, on the point of capacity, I think we've opened a Pandora's box that's very
Yes.
useful to consider, because different things will have different yield. So there's this lady called May K Sang. If you haven't connected with her, she's amazing. I can send you through her details later. It's MAI-KEE, and then her surname is TSANG. And she talks about sustainable visibility. And she has this concept of like capacity. I think she calls them piggy banks. So she's like capacity. I'm like fucks given. Like
yes.
How much, and and she also talks about yield. So say you and I are recording this podcast today, I'll publish it in a couple of weeks. And initially there might not be that many listens. And it's funny, I had a client on recently, I had a client on my show, and she was like, oh, Suzanne, nobody's joined my newsletter yet. Say, honey, the episode went live 2 days ago. I put out 3 episodes a week. Give people a minute. Do you know what I mean? But we're used to the world of social media where if you post something on Instagram, 3 hours later, it's forgotten. Whereas a podcast will have such a long yield time. Like I was part of a series in lockdown called the Self-Isolation series from 2020 that people still contact me about now, a podcast, 4 years later. So the half-life of a podcast is quite long. Whereas, say you do a summit, like I recently did a summit last week, had 80 people come to my list. I was like, me. Do you know how many? 10:01, Emily subscribed, got my freebie. 10:02, Emily unsubscribed. So it's kind of like, and also now that that summit's closed, it's done, everything's taken down, there's no continual yield from that. It's kind of like a crop that happens once, and then you've got to plant again and do a whole other summit, as opposed to a podcast that gives you a body of work over time. So when you're talking about your capacity, like I do quite like the balance, and I do some summits. And on the back of that summit, other people have invited me to their summits because like, I heard you talk. I think this would be great. And here's why. And I can tell who's actually listened to my presentation versus who's Pokemon carding their summit speakers, which is a whole other thing. But it's like, how many can I say yes to? Because usually a requirement of a summit is 1 or 2 standalone emails, a PS, some social media posts. I don't want to be forever spamming my list with this is what she's doing this week. Like some people do their whole business that way. And if that's you, you do you. I'm not judging. But I'm like, you've got to consider your capacity to be able to promote and be a great summit guest rather than just wanting to take and get in front of other people's audiences.
Thank you. Yes. Give is like the mentality. I say you have to go in with this. Like, actually, you shouldn't expect necessarily anything from the collaboration. You should just be going into it with a giver's mindset. And like, of course, there is ROI in many of these things that we do, right? But that's not like what I'm there for. And I think that's been the difference for me. I think I used to go into these things with like what not even what's in it for me, but more just like, well, this is gonna be the thing that like skyrockets me, right? And that's not the mindset I go into now. I'm building a body of work, and I want to make sure that everything I'm doing is actually like aligned for the direction that I'm going. So
when you said that line, I've got my book, shameless plug, The Beginning is Shit. And anyway, the number, especially the beta readers, but people who read it later, they're like, every time you came across something, this is going to be the thing. And I was like, I didn't even realize until I got it edited and I read it back that I had done that. Because my whole life, that book is about weight loss, which I have whole other opinions about now because of body positivity and loving the body you're in. So it's not the best example. But in business, it'll be like, oh, okay, podcast guesting, it's going to be the thing. Wasn't that. Networking, it's going to be the thing. Oh, it wasn't that.
Yeah.
Facebook ads, it's going to be the thing. Everything. And it's like, I honestly don't believe there is a thing now, because even the thing is the one where you've reached the tipping point. Like a lot of these things will chip away. And then was it that summit or that podcast or that book or whatever, or was it the fact that you stayed in the game for so many long? So do you know, have you heard of Denise Duffield Thomas?
Yes. I think I like started with her way back. Yeah.
So she's an Australian. I have mixed feelings. I'm nothing if not honest, but she has this book called Chillpreneur, like as in like, chillionaire or whatever. It's like, basically chill and make millions.
Yeah.
However, because I've followed her all the way through, I read all her books, she talks about how she busted her ass driving to networking events in a dinky car with a saggy roof, how she got up at like 5 a.m. to speak to people in the US and stayed up to 11 p.m. to speak to people in the UK. How you make your money or how you build your business, like all of this stuff is how she built the brand that she has. And then the messages will just sit around and chill your way to a million. To me, it's like, I think sometimes people's success is the fact that they stayed in the game.
Yeah, the resilience and the scrappiness and like the figuring it out along the way. And I love that you said not any one thing is the thing. Like I like to talk about marketing, like collaborations are a part of marketing. So I talk about it as like a pie, and there's all these different slices of the pie. You can choose, like you pick whatever pieces of that pie you want, but then focus on that and like know that it all goes together. And if you take one of those out, you have to like move some things around, right? And make one a little bit bigger. But you can't just put all your weight into social media. You can't just put all your weight into collaborations. You can't put all your weight into whatever the thing is at the time, networking. It all works together. And that's another reason like why capacity is so important. Cause like, I just believe that if we are not taking heed of our capacity, like that's when we can't be consistent. That's when you see people yo-yoing all over the place, right? Because they're just like, wee, trying this, trying that.
Well, that's such an excellent point. If you think of pie, I'm thinking apple pie. Let's go with fruit pie, for example.
Let's go with apple, please.
And if you're like, okay, I'm just going to keep adding sugar to this pie, Like I'm going to really keep adding sugar and keep adding sugar and keep adding sugar. And I've just got this image, and it's not really a pie anymore. It's just like this whole pile, like where you could give it to the neighborhood if they come over. And you're like, why is my pie doesn't taste any good? It's like, because you haven't
Yeah.
given any thought to the other ingredients. And also, so I'd be interested to see your take on this, but I see two approaches. One where people try and do everything. So it's like, I'm going to podcast, I'm going to YouTube, I'm going to TikTok, I'm going to write a newsletter, I'm going to summit, with no wherewithal for themselves and self-care. And that's basically the business that I do. When you do that scattergun approach or chuck spaghetti at the wall and you start to get the traction, well, which one was it? You don't know because you're doing all the things. Or they get so stuck on something, like this is why the chillpreneur thing's always annoyed me. Well, I've just got to like do my tapping and forgive and tap and do all my focus stuff. But if nobody knows you, if nobody knows your name, nobody's glad you came, then they can't find you. So it's finding the balance between choosing selectively which things you're going to focus on. So for me, for this year, it's been YouTube and my podcast. And then as we're coming towards the end of the year, I've actually had a change of heart. It's been a deliberately change of heart on YouTube though. I haven't reached, so for YouTube monetization, you need 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours. So I'm at 630 something subscribers. That could change overnight though. Like literally, if everybody on my list brought one person, I've made the subscriber count. So that's not the reason I've changed my mind. What's happened is a couple of my videos, I'm a sweary fairy, you guys who listen to me know that, has been picked up by adult content
Oh
and
no.
restricted. So the watch hours for those videos no longer count. So I was like, holy cow, my monetization strategy is being cuckolded by the YouTube things. I'm not going to be like, oh my God, YouTube's shadow ban. Not that, but it's like if me making income is determined by the machines and whether or not they like my language, actually maybe this strategy wasn't so great. And then some people are like, oh my God, you've wasted a year. I'm like, I never wasted anything. Like everything's reusable. But so what
Yeah.
I've deliberately chosen to do is for this podcast, which is the Nope Coach, is now a purely interview podcast. And that's how you and I met, through this Podmatch platform. And then my solo ramblings or musings, whatever you call it, I've put through Patreon. I can monetize that instantly. I don't need to wait for 1,000 subscribers or 4,000 hours or whatever. And I can say whatever the fuck I want because it's my platform.
Oh, I love that. I'm like even saying like, why aren't you doing like a course or something? Like, don't put it on YouTube, sell it. So I love that. And I do the same thing at the end of every year. So I try to I'd say if you're trying to decide like what that marketing pie should look like start with three things, okay? And don't let yourself keep throwing other pieces of spaghetti at the wall. If that's the current scene, okay, take the spaghetti off the wall and we're going to start again. So I pick three things every year that I like will go all in on. And then at the end of the year, I look back and I say, like, okay, what new things did I try? What went really fantastically? What just went fine, like what was okay, and then what totally sucked. And it's not always a clear cut answer because sometimes the thing that totally sucked the life out of you actually made you money. And you have to think about, well, where was that worth it, right? Sometimes the thing that went really, really fabulously didn't make you a dime. And you have to look at like, okay, am I going to keep going with that? So I do the same thing as I call it like a postmortem, at the end of the year, I like reflect back and then I choose my three for next year. And I really try to stick to that, but it also gives me boundaries so that like I'm not saying yes to every course that comes my way or every conference that comes my way or every network. Like I'm like, nope, this is what I'm focusing on this year. And next year I can change my focus accordingly.
I love that. I've never met a shiny object I didn't like, but this is the first year that I really narrowed my focus, and it made it so much easier when people did have amazing opportunities or courses. And sometimes it's so beguiling. It's like, it's never going to be this price again, or it's going to be one only. And I'm like, yeah, right. But, if it's not the right time, it's not the right time. And me buying something, it's going to gather digital dust on my hard drive that by the time I get around to it, I love to do things live. So if
Me
I
too.
can't ask the questions because they've moved on to something else. So I love your three things thing because it has me thinking, because we're almost at the end of the year now. So I'm not stopping YouTube as in like stomping my foot and whatever, but I'm not focusing on it anymore. So I literally just upload the videos and not worry so much. I'm not looking at the stats. I'm not looking at the data. If it continues to tug along and it reaches its thing, great. Because sometimes
Yeah.
too, there's that compounding. So the foundations have been laid, that can just do its own thing. But Patreon's my focus. pod match podcasting like this show. And then for the third thing, actually I haven't told anyone yet, but I'm dabbling, whatever, into ads. And ads has been interesting because
Oh.
I'm a sweary fairy. I've got to be really mindful of what I say so I don't get like my account deleted, because that may have happened once before. But like, because with business, you can have the most amazing party ever. You can have a really good product. You can be really good at what you do. But if you don't send out any invites, Ted Hargrave says that from Marketing for Hippies, if nobody knows your party's going on, then they don't get to come. And I do like summits, and I will take some here and there, but I don't want to like fully get behind that because it feels like a lot of work on top of podcasting. And also got to remember to podcast. Actually, technically, I suppose it's two, because both guest and host. Because but I do like that. So what have your three been for this year, if you feel comfortable sharing?
So this year I did podcast guesting. I did speaking, like, so I like help out at this local entrepreneurship organization, and I speak for them and do workshops for them and things like that. So speaking and workshops. And then I'm trying to think of my third. I'm like, well, I'll say this. At the beginning of the year, I was like, I'm going all in on Instagram Reels. I guess my podcast, like focusing on my podcast, would be my third. But I was going all in on Instagram Reels, and I quickly was like, this takes forever. Like, I do not have time and capacity to do this. So I think I kind of had to change my role like pretty early on in this year. But I did focus a lot on podcast guesting. Next year, I've already kind of like been thinking about that. So there was a course. I want to say this about the course thing, because I'm with you. I like to take them live. And I saw one. It was like, oh, it's never going to be this price again. And it was awful because it was at like my busiest time. And I had just had like I had just kind of had like a slow 2 months, like semi-intentionally, but not like kind of the scary kind of, So the course hits and I'm like slammed in my business. And I'm like, oh my God, there's no way I can do this and take the course at the same time. So I wrote the guy back and I was like, is that true that it's never going to be this price again? And then I said, and when is the next time that you're going to, offer the course? Because I like to plan for it, because if it's going to be 8 weeks long, I want to actually like know that I can be there that entire 8 weeks. He wrote me back the nicest email and said like exactly when it was going to start. And he said, yes, it's going to be this price. And if you want to get started on something that's like do it at your own pace, here are some things that you can start with. And then that would be deducted off any future purchase. Like, it was the nicest thing. And I'm like, I'm so glad I reached out to him. And now I know what I'm focusing on already in March. And that feels really good. Oh, I know another thing I tried this year that ended up like not really working out. So I work with a lot of interior designers and folks like in the home trades industry. Oddly, it's just like this
Because
niche
the
that,
mattress thing. You know what I
yes,
mean?
maybe. I don't know. It just happened to me, but I love it. There's a lot of different ways to say luxury and like sophisticated, and I like finding them. But I sponsored this group that was like full of that industry. And it just like didn't end up being like, I basically was just giving money to the group and nothing really was happening. So that was a good learning, just in honestly shifting from what I was focusing on and being like, ooh, shiny object, I'll try this too. And it didn't end up panning out for me. And I think I wished I hadn't. I mean, I'm glad it's like you said, I'm always glad I try things, but sometimes you have to cut your losses and say.
I think that's an excellent point too, in terms of, the way of looking at collaboration. So I will sometimes sponsor summits or events. And for anyone listening, if you don't know what that means, you give them an amount of money and then you can put your product in their swag bag, or they'll feature you at their email, or there's different things. Once you start to sponsor them, lots of people will ask you to sponsor theirs too, because it makes sense. You sponsored this one, why wouldn't you sponsor that one? So it's deciding ahead of time. Like, someone reached out to me on the back of the one I did last week and said, would you like to sponsor mine? And I said, I love the look of your summit, which was true. Like, I went and had a look and I did love it. I'm at capacity. I literally said I'm at capacity for sponsorship for this year. Happy to come as an attendee. We'll share it to my list. Like, you don't have to give me anything, because I just think what you're talking about is consent in general, particularly consent in marketing, is something I'm very passionate about. And then you never know, for next year, if they do their next annual one, then totally I might sponsor it or apply to speak at it, because she was really clear, like, it's too late, I've made my speaker selection. I was like, yeah, that's fine. And even if she hadn't, I already have something else on. So I think it's looking at, sometimes we get caught up in that FOMO. Like, if somebody asks me and I say no, they might not ever ask me again, or I might miss out. But if you aren't a good summit or collaborator, like if you do the school project thing and drop out, then you're not going to be asked again. And also, I think people appreciate the honesty. Like, I appreciate that you've approached me. I'm tapped out right now. Come back to me at this stage, or what can you do? Like I said, I'll come to that as an attendee. That doesn't take much spoons. I just sit in the audience and comment, like, I like that. But also, what does collaboration mean? You don't necessarily need to be the speaker at any of these events to make great meetings, because a lot of them have pop-up Facebook groups. If you're active, if you comment, if you share, if you've read it, don't make fake stuff. Like, nothing annoys me more than when people pretend, oh, I love this, and I can tell they haven't. Like, dear sir, madam, I love your podcast. Really? You don't even know that I'm not a sir?
God. I love when they don't even use the right name of your podcast. You're like, no, try again.
Or it's just a copy paste message that they've sent to everyone. Now, I'm not opposed to copy pasting some stuff, because, like, you might have a pitch or you might have something, but personalize it. Hi, Emily, something about your show that you do like. So actually have done something about it. And then here are the topics. Because sometimes when people just copy paste and here, or I'm on a book tour, or I want to get booked on 100 podcasts. That's great for you. What's this got to do with me and my audience?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
it's an immediately, ugh, it's.
So I guess that's another point. And I would be curious to hear from you as a host on Podmatch. But it's how you actually, like, how do you approach some of those collaborators when you really, yes, they are doing you a favor. I mean, yes, you're bringing value too, but they are giving you their platform. So, like, when we are podcast guests looking on to get with more hosts, I think for sure listening to an episode, I'm with you. And I think if you can't take, half an hour out of your day to do that, maybe don't pitch. But what are some other things that you as a host are like, "Ooh, I love when people do this for me as a guest," because for me, that was like my biggest. I mean, it was actually like it got a little triggering sometimes when I could tell people weren't listening. I'd be like, nah, it was so frustrating. Like, don't pitch me your sales pitch and that you want to be on 100 podcasts and you want to promote your book and this, that, and the other thing. That's frustrating.
The first thing I love, and it's so basic and it's so easy, I love it when it says, hi, Suzanne. I've got your pitch on the opposite window because I use a dual screen. When it starts with my name, like, it's so easy. Like, yes, my podcast is called The Nope Coach, but you can quickly find the person's name. And also, as any podcast host listening to this, some of you make it real damn hard to find your name.
True story.
Like, there was this one lady, I loved her show. She never introduced herself. Like, she never said her name. Her Instagram was all her business handle. And I was like, what is this woman's name? Like, it became like the hunt for Red October. I'm trying to find. Do you know what I mean? But hi, your actual name. And then something personalized, like you said, I met you recently at, like, so there was that. No, not saying you have to have met me. I'm a recluse. So chances are, if you're listening to this, I don't go to many things. But, someone once said to me, I love your wacky t-shirts. Like, that is in my line.
Yeah.
You could just paste that. But she's like, I've got the same one. And she sent me a selfie of, like, this one says Introverts Unite. But I was like, I'm not procrastinating. I'm doing side quests. So she had a selfie of herself. That had my attention. I was like, oh my God, we have the same shirt. Like, but something in some way that, because sometimes people will go, I love how your show is, I have a line on my Apple description. It's like, go from stress depressed lemon zest to easy squeezy lemon heat, whatever. They literally just give me my sentence back to me. I hate that. Like, personally, I would rather nothing than a faux connective point. Or they say something they love about the show, but then when we meet in our pre-chat and they go, oh, you're Australian. I'm like, holy shit. You said you've listened to this and you don't actually know I have an accent. Or if you are going to pitch on someone's behalf, I'm never opposed to it, like having a pitch from an agency, but be transparent about it. Because if you're pretending to be them, there's only one show that I've recorded that I never published. And it was because the person was pitched by an agency who pretended to be them. The very first thing for me, the red flag was when she said, "You're Australian." Like, I should have known that. And she was a
Mm-hmm.
stylist, and she was basically trying to sell me her styling thing. And I was like, honey, no. Like, and then she was saying, like, what about when you gussy up? I was like, I don't gussy up. I've worn makeup exactly twice in my life. And she's like, what about if you were like going to speak on stage? It's like, if they didn't want me as I am, I wouldn't do it. And she's like, well, how much percentage of your wardrobe do you wear? I'm like, 100%. She goes, so it's all? And I'm like, yes. And I was like, we could have had a wonderful conversation. Like, I think she had valid points. There are people who don't go to things because they're worried about their appearance or they hold themselves back, but not me.
Yeah.
So don't like try and sell the person on your
Yeah.
thing or make it all about you. As I said, I want to do 100 podcasts. I want to do this. And if you do have a book, totally mention it. If you offer, like, I did a book tour for my book and I actually posted it to people because then on the episode they have the actual book and people are much more likely to read it if they've got a physical copy. Yes, that's going to cost you money, but some people they won't even offer, so they're expecting me to go buy it, or they'll send me a digital. It's like I never read anything on screens. I'm old fashioned. I like to hold the thing. But like, how can you benefit their audience? So you said you had two ideas: fostering successful collaborations, which is what we're talking about, and content framework, which we could totally have back,
Yeah.
But I would say usually at least three, but at least two, and then they're different. And
Yeah.
then how it would benefit the Nope Coach audience. Because I think sometimes you just like, I want to get on this show, I want to get on this show. There's shows that I want to get on, but how would you feel to be on the receiving end of, but like there was one lady recently who she pitched on behalf of someone, and I said the thing, I'm not opposed to it, but here's the requirements. They have listened to the show. And she's like, this person has a podcast of their own and they have this much business and they have a big coaching thing. They haven't got time. And I wrote back, I said, so what you're saying is they want a seagull come in, steal the chips, get in front of my audience and fuck off. I didn't hear back from them, but it was just like, you're too busy, but it's okay for me to take you. No.
Yeah, I think we need to remember, and I think it starts like not to sound weird, but I do think you have to kind of like think about it from your heart, like connect to the person like on a heart level, because you are getting a gift when you collaborate with anybody. It doesn't matter the type of collaboration. It doesn't matter if I'm speaking on a stage or doing a podcast interview or hosting a book club with somebody. I am going into it with the like they are giving me a gift, right? Of sharing this platform with me. Like the people listening to this right now, you shared that with me. And that is a huge gift, something I don't want to take lightly. And I love what you added to the reminder for like if we are pitching hosts or speaking organizations, what is the person on the other side going to walk away with? Like, what is the value to them on the other side? Because that's who you, as the podcast host, are advocating for. And when we're collaborating, we need to advocate for our people, right? Like, I don't want to collaborate with somebody who I'm going to put in front of all my people and they're going to be like, what did you just do? Right? Who is this? And I've done it. I've done it. I've put somebody by my side and my people are like, okay, that's an interesting choice. So I think it's really a valid point. How are you going to benefit and bring value to their audience? Because they are giving you a gift, right? We're sharing ears, if you will.
And also, it becomes that they're all great points. And I'll add one last thing, and then I'll look at time and I want to hear all about
I
what you do and
know, I
stuff. But
know.
I said, do another one if you're open for it. But I think something that's overlooked is sometimes people will put a value in that's value to them, but it's not to me. So, like this
Mm-hmm.
person who is all about how busy they were and they have a list of 27,000 subscribers, whatever. I give no shits about that because I'm all about the power of one. The number of times I have in the past gone on to something because of the promise of being put in front of whatever. I remember once it was only like last year, it wasn't that long ago, and they said that my thing would get featured in front of 50,000 people. And I only ended up with one subscriber. And I know, like, I'm going to toot my own horn. My shit's good. Like, if my people hear my stuff, if 50,000 of them did, and I only got one, something's not right here. So then I went and had a look at it. And what it ended up being, Emily, is they had 100 people. And it was literally Suzanne Kohlberg, the Nope Coach, with the hyperlinks that went to my website. Just listed. So I got in front of 50,000 people, but nothing about, like, you'd had to have gone into that. why? And I think people get
Yeah.
stuck in these numbers. Like, I got to be on the stage with such and such. So basically, everyone came to the summit to see such and such. Nobody listened to your thing because you're the also ran. Like, let's be honest here. Instead, guess I'm more likely to get on my podcast. I don't give two shits about stats and numbers because when I look at it, I've had some big names on my show. The
Yeah.
people who get me the most downloads, because I do look at my stats, I don't care about them, but I do track them because, you know, I'm in business. If you're not tracking stats, you're not having a business, are the people who's usually their first podcast. And people will be like, why? How does it make sense? Because if I'm your first podcast, you're telling everyone. You're telling your
Yeah.
next door neighbor, you're telling your husband, you're telling your mum. Like, not saying that they're all the right fit, but you're crowing about it everywhere after you get over the fact that you're probably dying inside because you're humiliated. But do you know what I mean? You're sharing it. Whereas if you get a big name who's got 100,000, 200,000 followers who does a podcast every other day, they might add it as a PS, but usually it's PS you listed amongst 99 other things, which brings no interest. So they're actually leveraging your audience. You're not getting in touch with theirs.
I actually had two podcast guests that were big names and they shared in like a really big way. So one of them is like my grammar crush. Her name is Mignon Fogarty, and she's the host of the Grammar Girl podcast. She literally just talks about like words all day. It's amazing. And she shared my episode. She shared a blog about my podcast hosting process. And I was like, oh my God. Like I felt like part celebrity. It still didn't really do anything for my show, but like that meant something. And then I've only ever had one other big name like share my stuff. You are so right. Like it's the everyday people because, well, first of all, I know my listeners, if you will, and they will listen to anything I'm on. Like they just like keep on listening to my guest podcast, which I love. Like I know Terry is probably listening right now. Hi Terry. So that's something like I do not take lightly. And you're so right. Like sometimes the bigger names that we think are going to be so great, the thing, they're going to be the thing, right? And they don't end up being.
Yes. Well, that's the other thing too. Like when I was very early in business, before I had a website or whatever, I've always been a prolific writer. And I sent one of my pieces to Huffington Post and they shared it and they translated it into 17 languages. And I had like this boom of hits and people and whatever, but nowhere to send them to because I had no opt-in page and no idea what I was doing. But you know what I mean? You can still find it, but it's kind of exciting. And I had a friend, she had a Facebook post literally go viral. Like it reached however many million shares. When it does that, it will cap out and won't tell you anymore how often. Like, and her page went from around 1,000 likes or followers, whatever they call it these days, to like 25,000 from this one post. But did it actually bring any money? And I think that's the thing we don't look at. There is, you know, being famous or known or having something that goes out. Like we have this trash TV show. No, I shouldn't call it that. Some people might like it, but it's called Married at First Sight. And I watch it to turn off my brain. But the last season, there was a couple of characters, all in general characters that were like real life. It's a reality show, but they were
Oh,
like,
I've seen it.
I didn't make enough subscribers. Like I can't be an influencer. It's like, so you have to go back to work. Boo hoo. But didn't you do this to find love? Or
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, we need to like have a reset, I think, as a online entrepreneur community and really focus back on what matters most. And it is not always the numbers. Like you, I keep track of my numbers. There are numbers that are very important to me. My most important number is my bank account.
exactly. And the fame or whatever doesn't necessarily equal. Like I've talked to people who've had some of the most beautiful websites I've ever seen, have had the most amazing stuff. And then, you know, when you hit stop and sometimes the real talk goes down and they're like, they haven't sold shit. I've been like, you wouldn't know. Like you can't tell
Hmm.
from what you see online and what you hear versus the thing. And I think, you know, a little bit more transparency because sometimes you're like, I assume, and for me, and this is the last point because I know you were at time and I'm mindful of your time, but I was part of this group and it was an online group and they had this, what do you call it? Like a 3-day thing that you attend in person conference. And anyway, you could pitch to be a speaker at this conference and I got accepted. I was so excited. And anyway, there's a whole story with this. But I was on a call with someone And they're like, I want to be a six-figure earner like you. And I was like, excuse me, because I've never made income claims. Now it's apparently illegal, but I just never did along the time. And I was like, what makes you think I make six figures? You know, just pure curious. And she's like, oh, such and such doesn't put anybody on their stage unless they're six figures plus. Like that's how they marketed the conference. And I actually had to turn around and I said, I don't feel comfortable speaking at something that's being promoted that is out of integrity for me. And a number of my friends said, you idiot, like the reach you would have gotten and whatever. And then also too, it was supposed to be that they paid their speakers. So when the thing came through and there was no money attached, I was just curious, like, and they were like, oh, well, you'll get exposure, so people will work. I was like, well, the way you're saying the people on stage make six figures plus and you pay your speakers doesn't line up to me to they get paid on the clients they get from here. Like 1 + 1, as you were talking, equals whatever. That to me was like 1 + 1's equaling 3. Like
0. Yeah.
I'm just like, no, thanks. And to this day, there's never been a doubt. And a few people who have known about it and were in the ends of it, it's like, did you ever regret it? I'm like, no, I can't get my integrity back for anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a good learning lesson for you, I think, to know where that line is for sure. So good on you for holding that, because I think that's a lot of a lot of things we let go in pursuit of those flashy lights, right?
Yeah, well, I did a whole piece recently. It's on my Patreon, so shameless plug for my Patreon for anyone. Or you can just buy it as a standalone, because I did that, and it was like unfiltered talk about course creation. And one of the things I spoke about is, this six-figure thing that everyone talks about. Ask six figures in what? Because like I will be honest, I haven't made six figures in a year yet. I've come close. But over the course of my business, house, yeah. Like, so sometimes when you see this thing and you're like, oh my gosh, and then you ask them, they've been in business 10 years, that's 10,000 a year. That ain't that fucking sexy.
Okay. Also, my mattress store was 6 figures, and I tell you what, I took home less money in that store than I take home now at not exactly six
Well,
figures.
yeah, overhead
Yeah.
too. Like, as I said, for
Yeah.
next year, for 2025, I'm going
Yeah.
into ads. My top line will probably go up significantly, but I'll have an ad spend that I didn't have before. And like my sister has a business, shout out if you're listening, she does. Hello, Shirley. Image Plus scrapbooking, look it up. Australian based, but she sells product, but then there's the price of the product, whereas I sell a service. So I don't
Yeah.
have that overhead of buying the thing. So anyway, we've gone at time and I know that you've got things to do. So Emily, let everybody know what it is you do and where they can find you. And I want to hear more about the mattress store. So if you want to come back, we
Oh,
can
I
totally
do.
do another episode.
I'm up for it anytime. So now I do not sell mattresses anymore. I write website copy and blogs and things of that ilk to help business owners with their marketing efforts. And I think the easiest place to find me, where like I hang out on social media, where my podcast is just emilyaborn.com.
Perfect. And what's
And
the name of your
I
podcast?
content with character.
With character.
Yeah, I like to have a
Like
little fun.
that.
I like to have fun with my content creation, and not, it's not the slog that everybody says it is. And I want to help other people really tap into who they are as they're sharing.
Sweet. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you everyone for listening. Bye for now.